Hi, everybody. This is Miranda from Anarchapulco. I am co-producer, and we are here for another partnership highlight. This one I'm extremely excited about because the things we're going to talk about today have had both a huge effect on me and a lot of people that I really love. So today we are with Adam Schell from Brain Supreme. I'm going to let him speak for himself as to what this is about, but I want to start by asking you, Adam, how are you today?
Good. Yeah, I'm really good. I'm great.
So
Yeah.
tell us about Brain Supreme. What is it?
Brain Supreme is a psilocybin-based microdosing supplement. I like mushrooms for all different purposes. I like them therapeutically, psychedelically, mindfully, recreationally. But what we're really about is supplementation. So we set out to create with Brain Supreme is a premium life optimizing microdosing supplement that takes, depending on which product, about 100 milligrams of a proprietary type of mushroom that we developed, psilocybin cubensis mushroom, and we blend it with herbs, nootropics, and amino acids for different desired effects. But we are solidly in the psychedelic microdosing space.
That's awesome. You mentioned 100 milligrams, and that's actually less than what most people consider to be a microdose. How did you land at that dose instead of what I've heard a lot of other people use? Like here in Mexico, if you buy microdoses, it's a half gram, no matter who you buy it from, which I know is not a microdose. So, how did you determine that dosage as the optimum level?
So, oh, listen, the thing is, and I try to bring this across on like my online coaching course. By the way, the website's brainsupreme.co. If it's not .com.co. So I try to bring this across during every podcast and coaching course we have online and in conversations like this. Psilocybin is so neurologically and biologically specific that it's almost slightly irresponsible to provide like hardcore definitions of what's a microdose, what's a recreational dose, because it can vary so widely. So generally, the best way to understand a microdose is through the concept of a macrodose, a big psychedelic dose that most people either have done or have heard of. So traditionally, the macrodose was 5 grams or 5,000 milligrams. Now, traditionally, the microdose is considered to be at the sub 10% level of that. Now, this can vary widely upon the type of mushroom. So, if you're in Mexico and somebody's pulling, like a variation of golden teacher out of local cow patties, that might be a less potent strain, and you might need to microdose at 500 milligrams. But if you're growing in like the most conscientious, um, controlled environment possible with biogeometry, filtered water, special soil blends, and nutrients and so forth. 500 milligrams could be into the recreational zone. So for the most part, like if you're growing a supplement in a like a supplement style, microdosing tends to happen between 1 to 400 milligrams. Most people seem to microdose. The sweet spot seems to be 2 to 300 milligrams. So for us, that'd be 2 to 3 capsules. But this can really vary widely, which I've come to learn over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed that too. And yeah, it depends on the strain and things. I know there's like, for example, the super strong penis envy varieties compared to, like you said, a golden teacher or
Hmm.
something similar. There's completely different
Yeah.
concentrations
And,
in
and if I
those.
remember from my days traveling as a young man in Mexico, they were like the classic cow patty, golden teachers.
You would be surprised. The person I'm mentioning that does that, there's a mycologist in Mexico City who is licensed by the government and he grows everything in a laboratory and sells them um all over the country. He can ship and everything legally, but he has all varieties,
Yeah. Okay.
He's got the golden teacher grown in the lab, but he also has the, like, you eat 2 grams and you're melting
Right.
variety,
Right.
so
And but that person is selling now. When you say 500 milligrams, is that total per capsule, or is that just mushroom? Because our capsules are 500 milligrams, but it's 100 milligrams of psilocybin and 400 milligrams of complementary ingredients.
yeah, so he has some options like that, but for the most part, his micro doses are 500 milligrams. Because, like, you take it and you feel it in your body. It doesn't feel like a microdose the way when you take a true microdose, your brain just problem solves better. That's what I've noticed the most is like when it's truly at that perfect level, things work better, but you're not like feeling sensations in your body or, you know, things are a little sparkly or anything like that, visually speaking.
The definition that we have on the coaching course is like your sweet spot is for a microdose by the Brain Supreme standards is perceptible, non-intoxicating, non-hallucinatory, but you notice some uptick in your overall well-being and efficacy. 5 to some people report 50, 60, 70%. I like to set reasonable expectations. I'd like to think our product makes you like somewhere 10 to 15% better on a daily basis or when you use it. But if you aggregate that, over weeks and months and years, like that's a hell of a lot better.
Yeah, it really does matter. Like, I know there's a statistics out there. You only use a certain percentage of your brain or whatever. I've used microdosing personally over the years, and what I've noticed is when done correctly, um, it will help you through all sorts of issues that you're having in your life. You know, like when I started microdosing, within 2 weeks, I had ended a relationship that was not bad. Or that was not good. I had gotten out on my own. I was feeling strong. I was solving problems with my job that maybe I've Googled 5 to 10 times, but when I was microdosing, I didn't need to Google it again. I just knew what to do, or maybe I'd think of the creative solution. And I think a lot of people are when they think microdosing, they're like, "Well, what does that even mean? Like, what sort of changes am I gonna notice?" For me, it was what I described. Um, what would you add to that in terms of, like, when you say better, what do you mean by that?
So the science of psilocybin, I mean, you could watch like a really good, 3-hour Huberman podcast on this, but the science of psilocybin basically breaks down to it moves your brain in a beneficial direction, whether you're cognizant of it or not. If you tend to be cognizant of it, it can move your brain in a beneficial direction a little faster. You have some attentionality. So, it's very hard to quantify. This is an entirely subjective experience that people have with microdosing. We get a lot of feedback that like people can compartmentalize their lives a little better. They can process stress better. Um, Energy for workouts and enjoyments of workouts. I tend to find that there's this saying, a spiritual teacher that I had years ago had this saying is that energy follows action. So you got to take your actions in life. You got to get up, put the shoes by the door, wake up, go for a walk, go to the gym, whatever it takes, you know. But the nice thing about microdosing is it kind of helps the energy precede the action a little bit. Like it puts the wind in your sails. So, because it just has this way of moving the brain in that beneficial direction. So, there's a couple things going on with psilocybin at the macro and particularly at also the microdosing level, is that you have neurogenesis, the creation of new neural pathways. You have neuroregenesis, so older or damaged pathways get regenerated, or they find a workaround. And then you have a form of neurodegenesis where it unwires old and negative pathways. And so that process is going to be a little different for everybody. It's impossible to quantify. For me, I would say, as 8 years now developing into the microdosing space and developing the company, I have found overall it's this empathic connection, deep, deep, deep connections to other human beings and to also my own sense of authenticity or inauthenticity. Like, as soon as I'm inauthentic, if there's something that's coming up, ego, you need to flex, show off or something, like I know immediately, oh, I'm going into that zone and that feels really inauthentic. So check yourself, come back this way. That it's almost a form of like in these crazy times that we're living, like a spiritual sustenance in a way. It just helps me stay grounded and more effective, empathetic and compassionate. And I have to say, as a guy who's likes to work out and into fitness, if you time out your microdose before your workouts and you do what we have called the performance protocol, man, is it really great as an athlete and for flow state and exercising and so forth. It's terrific.
I'm super curious about that because I am, especially this year, I got a trainer. I've always done, like not always, but for 5 years I've done aerial stuff, but I started weightlifting this year. And so I want to ask more about that in a second, but you had mentioned the neurogenesis, there's that neuroplasticity side of it. And for me personally, that was where I noticed in my microdosing experiences, the biggest change is because, yeah, you are regrowing old pathways. And when you deal with heavy trauma, the way that I have, like I've witnessed a murder, like I witnessed my best friend shot. I lost everything in the process. And that breaks things to an extent, right? And it breaks your ability to learn. And I noticed that my ability to learn and put things together without having to go to Google or some outside source was so much higher. And at first, I remember I was taking microdoses very regularly. And at this point, I only microdose every so often, but I think that's because here in Mexico, I don't really have access to blends, right? I have access to just a microdose that's just psilocybin. And you've mentioned that your microdoses, I know you have the Genius blend that Kat's really interested in. I also know that you have the Athlete blend. And it kind of sounds like these things have other things added to them in order to stimulate those processes, right?
Yeah. So we've got um, our flagship is Genius. Oh, there we go. Genius is our most so psilocybin in and of itself, magic mushrooms are the ultimate nootropic. Like there's no combination of caffeine, alpha theanine, L-tyrosine, alpha GPC. There's no nootropic in the world that's really as effective as psilocybin. So all nootropics are the category of vitamins and supplements for brain performance and neurological health. So all our products are deeply nootropic, but Genius is our kind of double whammy where we take classic nootropics, L-theanine, L-tyrosine, alpha GPC, little guarana, and and we blend it with 100 milligrams of psilocybin. So this is like you consider our brain formula. And then our emotional formula, feel good. We take that same 100 milligrams and we blend it with herbs and amino acids and nutrients that are good for the mood, the emotions, the libido, things of that. Athlete, which you've been referring to, this is our performance formula where we take that same 100 milligrams and we blend it with amino acids and nutrients that are good for hormonal production, testosterone production. Everybody needs testosterone production. It's the leading hormone for women as well. And some recovery elements. And then we have Black Stack, and this is our triple strength. This we take a 300 milligram microdose and we blend it with ginger, nanocurcumin, and vitamin C. So this is our strongest one. So what the stack that I was kind of referring to is the performance stack, which is very much I like to do. You take Genius and Athlete together, one and one, two of one of the other, two and two, and about 75 minutes. Everybody's got to figure this out for themselves, but about 75 minutes is when you really start to enter flow state. So if you can time that out for your workout, I developed this protocol for some amateur and professional athletes, MMA guys, um, and you microdose at a slightly higher level. So for me, it's two Genius and two Athlete, which is 400 milligrams of what we call active ingredient. So our packaging, we keep the secret ingredient off the packaging and off the website. I speak freely on the podcast, but so I've literally 30,000 sales. I've got maybe 10 or 15 emails. Does this have magic mushrooms? Yes, it does. But for obvious reasons, we keep that off the website and we keep that off the packaging. So the performance dosing will be a slightly higher microdose. So you got to kind of figure out your sweet spot. So for me, it's 400 milligrams, which is two Genius and two Athlete, about 60 to 75 minutes before my workout. And my workouts are flow state. And then the benefits of the microdose linger throughout the day and into the next day. And this is when you microdose at a higher level, I never recommend going days in a row. I go one day on, 2 days off, or every other day. So the performance dosing protocol is literally like 1 day practice, 1 day game day. So let's say you practice on Wednesday, and then Saturday is your big pickleball day that you want to peak on. So that would be your, for my athletes, they train Wednesday with their performance dose, so they know the feeling. You never want to start this on game day unless it's like a superficial fun thing. But if it's anything real where the outcome kind of matters to you, definitely start on your practice day. So it's a slightly higher microdose done either every other day or 1 day on, 2 days off, or practice day, game day. And it's designed as kind of a flow state microdose.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. And I mean, I've dived a lot into the hormonal health thing, and it does sound counterintuitive, that testosterone matters for women, but it really does. Like, if I remember correctly, 1 in 10 women have endometriosis, and whether this is 100% true or not, endometriosis is considered an excess of estrogen. And one of the only ways to balance out that estrogen is to have either more progesterone or testosterone. And so it would make sense that that blend would help. I mean,
But
just
this is also, I mean, we're not talking, synthetics. We're talking,
right.
we're
But things
talking
that
just different
stimulate
different
that.
herbs and nutrients that help stimulate healthy hormone production.
Right, exactly. And even training itself, that's the big thing I've learned from weight training because it's a big thing I've changed in my life in the last 6 months. And my hormones are more or less balanced now, whereas they were all over the place before. And so it's interesting how that works. I think it's
The
super
older you
fast.
get, the more you need to weight train.
Yeah,
Yeah,
especially as a woman, because
yeah.
our bones and muscles just deteriorate literally by the year. It's kind of sad. Um, but how good that we have these sorts of solutions, right? What I want to know is, I want to know, like, how did you get on this path? Like, what started you down this path of developing these specific things?
So I was, my life is it's kind of funny for it was kind of a failed novelist turned cannabis kingpin. It was like a Netflix series for a number of years. So Um, I had written a book. Everybody thought I was crazy. I spent like 10 years writing a book, wasting my 30s. What are you doing? But the book ended up selling for like over $1 million in 4 days. It was a multi-book deal, big publishing company. But between the purchasing of the manuscript and the release date of the book, we had the 2008, 2009 housing crisis, and then the publishing world imploded. Amazon took over. The number one, two, and three at Random House all got fired. These were the people who were supporting my book. And then the day my novel came out, Michael Jackson died. So every interview, every review, everything, it all just disappeared. So I had lost a bunch of weight, went back to training and teaching yoga and doing a bunch of other things, and I was kind of odd jobbing it. But I had put together a soccer not for profit. We were living on the backside of the Malibu Mountains in a town called Calabasas. There was one little middle class enclave there, and we were going to this kind of hoity-toity private school. Um, they did really good financial aid though at the time, so they got us in. And I started a soccer not for profit for my 3-year-old son at the time. And there were some very influential families that went to this school, like Illuminati like families and so forth. I wasn't that aware back then. They were all just nice people to me, celebrities, kids, all this stuff. And we had this coach from Spain and the soccer trainings going on for these little kids. And one of the dads said to me, like, "Hey man, I like the way you operate. You got this family and that family. You got this great coach from Spain. You built this not for profit." And he said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "What?" Because I was really reeling from the loss of the novel and kind of odd jobbing it again in my mid 40s. He said, "Come to this meeting with me. I like the way you operate." And he introduced me to the California cannabis industry. And at that point, like, I don't know, 2015 or so, the bar was so low that competent and honest was like the new extraordinary. And I was a guy, I didn't really know much about weed. I was always kind of a jock. I don't have no issue with weed. Weed's just never been great for me. Gets me very in my head. I get very self conscious and stuck in my head, and it's kind of a boring feeling to me. And then I overeat. I just can't stop eating. So it's never been great medicine for me personally. But I needed something interesting to do and to make more money. So basically within 3 years, I was like, making tons of money, running distribution up and down the state. I had vans and security and 100 farms on my Rolodex, and I could tell a good bag of weed from half a mile away. Like I was a weed expert because it's basically a commodities business. You're like you're a produce buyer. But when the produce is like, 900 to $4,000 a pound, the boss is going to buy the produce because there's so much at stake. So I was traveling up and down the state, but I was never really a weed guy. But one of the guys who lived in this little enclave in Calabasas there, um, European guy, Eastern European guy, I'll leave it at that. He was a very, very good guy. And he turns out was a little bit in the cannabis industry and he had a really nice little grow. And he was very tinkery and creative and had a scientific degree. And we would meet in the sauna. Our kids were friends and we would talk. It's like the one Jewish guy and the Russian guy would meet in the sauna and we would have these great sauna sessions and bullshit. And I was saying to him, I'm doing great in the cannabis industry, but I'm not really a cannabis guy. But I had some experience as a young man with psilocybin, and like people are starting to talk about microdosing. I'm getting almost to 50. Like I need a hack. Like I'm really interested in this concept. And he's like, I could do that. You know, I come from 4 generations of mushroom foragers. We had a house in the country. I used to pick and dehydrate. I know a lot about mushrooms. I'm like, if I funded you out, could you put up a small grow? He said, yeah. I'm like, fuck it, let's do it. I trust him. I like him. We were friends. He would work with me sometimes. So literally, it was like his ancestors just started speaking to him, and within 6 months, he's bringing in genetics from Europe because he speaks multiple languages, and he's joins an underground zoological network. So we're having exotic grow mediums of rhinoceros and ostrich and giraffe doing crazy things, and we started to propagate really really good mushrooms, and then we started blending them with herbs and nootropics and amino acids. It was basically all because I was a guy who was approaching 50 years old, and I had a lot of shit to get done and kids to pay for and all this stuff, but I needed a hack. But it turns out that during this time, as we're developing what's going to eventually be Brain Supreme, my whole life goes upside down. The cannabis industry starts to totally tank. I got out of my lane. I was doing great in distribution. I bought farms, and I had no idea. I'm not like I was a yoga teacher and a novelist and a chef. Those were the three areas and that I had. So I was very good in business in the sense of relationships, trustworthiness, consideration. The people who would go up to buy weed, they were like not the most considered conscientious people. I would be calling my farmers from 100 miles away as I'm passing the last time, like, hey, you guys need some lunch? I know you're out there in the hills and this and that. So it's like I was a whole new level. So my my seeming business skills and success exceeded my business savvy. And I got out of my lane, and I had opportunities to buy into farms. I bought into farms, and literally within 2 years, I lost everything, millions, and got myself in real trouble because COVID hit and the price spiked and then totally tanked. All this weed started to flood in from Canada as the fuckers in Canada started to look the other way because they were growing so much weed, they couldn't sell it there. So they started to flood the US markets through Chicago and New York and Atlanta. So they're getting all this decent indoor that they're pricing at $700 a pound. It ends up crashing the market as well. And then we had first year of fires, and all our weed got smoke damage, like 50,000 pounds of losses. And then we doubled down for the next year as the price is crashing and crashing and crashing, thinking we can grow ourselves out of the problems. And I'm taking out loans and doing all this stupid, crazy shit. I just should have cut my losses and start over. But you always think there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Even if we just get $500 a pound, I can pay off the investors and get out of this crazy business now and so forth. But we end up getting this inverted atmospheric river, which I don't believe was legitimate. I think it was weather manipulation, but that's another story. Um, and we have 13 inches of rain over 11 consecutive days the day we start harvesting. And
Yeah,
we
that's a
lost
death
every
sentence.
we lost every pound of mold. And then
Mhm.
I was destitute. Like I had nothing. Everything was gone. I doubled down, I doubled down, I doubled down. It's like the Merchant of Venice. Every ship, you think, well, this ship's going to work, that ship's going to work. And all ships ended up sinking. Very scary, terrible time. But we had been developing Brain Supreme. I had been bankrolling that. I couldn't do that anymore. So like but my partner and I, we still have this vision that we're going to launch this brand and do this thing. So, he's grinning and bearing it and odd jobbing it. And I'm trying to hustle cannabis again, but the market's collapsed. So like when I was at the height of the game, you were buying outside pounds, light depth pounds or good outdoor pounds at around $1,500 at the farm. By the end of 2021, it was $300. It costs you $400 to grow it and trim it and pay the
Mhm,
taxes. Like
mhm.
everybody's getting destroyed. So you couldn't even hustle yourself out of the problem because there was no market anymore. Everything just collapsed. It was a disaster. But I never forget, I'm in the Central Coast and I've got a van full of weed that no one wants to buy. I had just gone to LA. Nobody wants it. I'm driving it back. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I am 260 pounds. I'm not sleeping at night. I've got night terrors and cold sweats. I'm sleeping about 3 hours. COVID is just awful at this time. Like Northern California couldn't wait to torture children and bankrupt themselves. It was a terrible time. My wife and kids had split to go to Texas. We were still a family, but California was so bad. They'd been thrown out of school because of a masking incident, which is a whole other story. I don't want to digress. Like My kid's mask was falling below his nose while they're in an outside school playing, and they're screaming at him, you're a killer, you're murdering me, you're killing me." 11-year-olds. Instead of guarding the ball, they're guarding the mask. So he eventually said to them, "Shut up, you nose Nazi." We used to call these people nose Nazis that would monitor where your nose was with the mask. That was our term in the house. Now, we're allowed to say that because my dad's actually a Holocaust survivor. So, like, we get the free pass on that word. But the Waldorf school that he was going to was so, fuck whatever Steiner taught about. We want these kids double vaccinated and wearing masks, and, it was stupid, stupid time. So my kids had gotten thrown out of the school because he called a kid a nose Nazi, which was like the worst thing ever. And so they moved to Texas. I'm trying to unwind all this shit. And we had this miracle in our grow room where we had 4 different strains we were growing that was the Brain Supreme proprietary mushroom blend. And we had this like miraculous mutation where all these strains seemed to combine in one mushroom that looked completely different and hit different. It did everything we wanted for a microdose. And so my partner was able to propagate that mushroom, and that's now the Brain Supreme mushroom that we've generations and generations. That's our kind of proprietary mushroom. I really have no idea whether it's proprietary or not. God gifted us, the mushrooms gifted us some spectacular mutation that seemed to really encapsulate what we were trying to do with Brain Supreme. Focus, energy, heart open, a little bit of everything. It kind of gave us that. And so we had just developed the formula for Genius, talking about this to combine the how much milligram, this new mushroom. And I'd forgotten that he'd sent me some samples, and I had taken 2 weeks off from microdosing to test this new sample. I'm driving along the Central Coast, and I'm just like, I'm at my lowest, man. I'm not prone to addiction and real abuse like that. But for me, like, I was in rough shape. And I took 2 of these Genius, and I didn't even think about it. And about 45 minutes later, I'm driving and I feel my brain go thunk. It just upregulates. And I'm like, oh, wow. Like, I'm I'm not depressed right now. Like, I'm feeling like optimistic. Like, those clouds look wonderful. Like, look at these wildflowers. Like, life just got brighter and sunnier. And like, it all felt like it was going to work out. Like, this will be okay. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, I think we're onto something. And that's when it was like, boom. And then basically, it was the development of the Genius formula, over the next 18 months that allowed me to unwind the clusterfuck of California, relocate, build the brand, build my life. So my own like personal, 50-year-old regenesis story, rebirthing story is completely parallels with the development of Brain Supreme and Genius. And that's when we knew we really met something. We had something. And then when I moved to Texas, the way the symmetry works, we weren't a brand yet. But I was interviewing a guy who was going to maybe be a website designer, and I'm at a coffee shop here in Austin, and I had met Dr. Andrew Wakefield in the 2000s when I was teaching yoga. He brought one of his documentaries to this yoga studio. This is when liberals in California could talk about vaccines and have an honest conversation before they all lost their minds. And I just went up to him afterwards and shook his hand, said, "God bless you. This is amazing work." And it was very impactful for my now wife and I when we saw these films. It really dawned on us. It was thankful this before we had children. And I don't know whether I would have gone the vaccination route, but this was like, this sealed the deal. Like, these people are not to be trusted. Like, you have an immune system and it's amazing. And, so it was one of the first like black pilling, red pilling, whatever awakening moments that you want to talk about. So I always remember Dr. Andrew Wakefield. I remembered his story very well because I'd read about it and I'd met him personally, and I knew that what happened to him wasn't fair. So 3.5 years ago, I'm in a coffee shop in Austin, Texas, and I see a guy in front of me, and I'm like, Andy Wakefield? I said, Andrew Wakefield. I said, Andrew Wakefield? And he turns around and he says, only my mother calls me Andrew. Andy. So I'm like, oh, Andy. And he has this look like, I don't know you. I'm like, no, 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 no. It's cool. I'm a fan. I'm a fan. And he's like, oh, I know all about you. And I kind of rattle off his resume and life story to this guy that I'm with here. And he's like, wow, you really do know me. I'm like, dude, I'm telling you, man, you're an amazing human being. I love you. I thank you. And you might have saved one of my second child. We think probably would have been autistic had we not been so aware and conscientious to just the manner of his birth and so many other things. He's an amazing kid, super talented, but he had this quirkiness about him as a kid where like this could have, and my wife was 40 at the birthing time, like this could have gone the wrong way, we possibly think. Um, and so I mentioned that, I think you've had a real impact in my life. And we had this great moment. And he says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm developed this thing called Brain Supreme, and I'm meeting with a website designer, and we're going to have a coffee." And he said, "Oh, that's great." He said, "Is it up yet? Can I buy some?" I'm like, "Well, we're not. Well, the website's not up. We're just kind of pre-launch, but here you go." And I gave him a pack of Genius, and he said, "Okay." He said, "Can I give you my phone number in case I want more?" And he said, "Yeah." So he gave me his phone number, and then 5 days later, I usually would wait. Back then, I was hand selling. I would always check in. I wanted all the feedback. I would check in with everybody 10 days later after they'd had a course. I get this phone call at 9 a.m. I'm like, "Oh my god, it's Andy Wakefield." So he calls me. He's like, "Adam." I'm like, "Andy, what's going on?" He's like, I'm a filmmaker and a writer." I said, "Yeah, I've seen your documentary." He goes, "No, no, features and narratives. I write all these things." I'm like, "Oh." He said, "10 years ago, I wrote the best fiction film that I've ever done, but I never had an ending for it. And it sits in a drawer in my office and it torments me every day of my life." He said, "I woke up at 4 a.m. with the ending complete in my mind. I just finished writing. It's the best thing I've ever written. And the only thing is that I'm on day 5 of Brain Supreme. And something in that product unlocked something in my psyche. And all this came out in the last 4 hours." He said, "When can I get more? And you need to meet my son, Sam." Now, cutting back to the previous story. So Sam Wakefield is now one of my best friends, my business partner, does our website. And that's when we really became a brand, is when he introduced me to Sam. Sam came on, built our Shopify, our website, our marketing, and so forth. And so that's the full genesis of the Brain Supreme origin story.
That's amazing. I'm super glad that you were descriptive because sometimes when I ask people this question, it's like a 1 to 2 minute answer. And it's like, but I still want to know more. So thank you for how
I gave you
detailed.
11. I gave you 11 minutes, I think.
Something like that, but whatever, it was super interesting, and it gives a good background. There's a lot of things to touch on, like, first off, the cannabis industry. I don't know if you know anything about my story, but I'm a cannabis fugitive in Mexico, and so I'm very intimately aware of just how quickly things can go wrong. Most people, they look at the cannabis industry from the outside and they're like, "Oh, easy money, money that literally grows on trees." But what happens when those trees mold? Like what happens when the market tanks because of what you had described as Canada flooding the US market?
You knew about that. Most people, no, very few people understand that.
I mean, yeah, so it hit the whole story in a lot of different ways hit me very intimately because yeah, like I've lost crops of weed to mold, to spider mites, to anything that you can think of. It's happened, right? I'm not
Where were your farms? Where were you working?
I was in Ohio for most of it and in Mexico. Like when the murder happened, we were trying to produce at our house to supply the Anarchapulco people, right? Because we were told as long as you don't deal with powders in Mexico, you cannot have issues with the cartel. I'm still not 100% sure what happened there with my story. That's a whole side tangent, right? But I have had a lot of years of farming. I consumed weed every day for 12 years until I didn't. And that's also part of how I got into microdosing is I found a study that says chronic weed use, the way that I was consuming, impacts your pancreas. By the time I quit weed, I ate corn tortillas and beef, and anything else put me in flares that made me sick for weeks. Even just a tiny bit of breadcrumbs on my food would make me seriously ill. I got pancreatitis. I quit randomly about 4 years ago, and now I can digest everything, right? But I was having this disconnect because you had mentioned your son, had he got vaccines, he might have been full blown autistic. Um, I believe the thing that causes the disorder that people think of as autism is exacerbated by vaccines. I do think there is a genetic sort of a superpower that kind of gets mutated by vaccines, right? It runs in my family. I know that I am autistic. I also know that my mother quit giving me vaccines 7 years earlier than all my peers. In some cases, 12 years earlier. But I stopped getting vaccines super early because she was noticing a shift in me, right? So it does make a huge difference. It does make the hypersensitive. It can turn a kid that's brilliant and, creative into a kid that regularly experiences meltdowns and all sorts of bodily issues. So there's definitely something to that. And I also deal with ADHD. I don't know if it's related to that or what, but the 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 microdosing thing, it helped consolidate all of that. So your story touched on so many different things from my own story and my own journey through all of this because yeah, we live in a world that is very contraindicative to people who are highly creative, highly sensitive, because it takes a highly sensitive person to be able to notice needs in a market and to be able to develop something like what you're talking about. And then beyond that, you mentioned when you took your Genius blend for the first time. Um, I found it beautiful that like you mentioned you were at your low. Well, they say necessity is the mother of all invention. And I think that's a perfect example of that. You know, like you created what you needed, and it just so happens that it's a common problem. The majority of people need that. So I think what an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that in detail cuz that's super super fascinating to me. And I'm wondering when it comes to microdosing and things of that nature, what are your thoughts on that and how it can interact with things like autism or ADHD? Like, what are your experiences? Because you say you do coaching and things like that. How much do those sorts of, I don't want to say issues, but like mind states, how often does that come up in people asking you for help?
Well, it comes up a lot. So, the nice thing about the nice thing about having a brand and selling a product is you can give your knowledge away for free because you just want to sell product, which makes me that's very authentic for me. Like the idea of like charging for knowledge, it never for me. It's a very valuable thing. Coaching is a great thing, but for me, it never feels great. The idea of giving that knowledge away. Now, I sell a coaching course online. We've done maybe 20 or 30 of them. And people need like if they want to talk to me for hours and they're really nervous and need the hand holding, but I talk to all my customers. Anybody who leaves a 3-star review or less, I call them right up. I'm like, what's going on? And so I say this quite often, but it bears repeating. There are so many better experts in the world in terms of brain science. I'm not even close. I'm not on the chart. Okay. There's so many better experts in the world when it comes to mushrooms and mycology and so forth. I'm not even close. The one thing that I might be number one at, or certainly in the top, is I've had 4,000 conversations on how to microdose because we've sold about 30,000 of these now. And I've spoken to probably a fifth of them. And when we were beginning, everything I did was hand selling, checking back in, getting feedback, hand selling, beta groups and so forth. So I have had an abundance of conversations on how to microdose successfully. And I try to reiterate this as often as I can because look, I'm 56 and basically emotional freedom is like the most important thing to me. I want to have a great interaction with you, and then I don't want to think about it again. Or if I think about it, I think, oh, that was great. My conversation with Miranda was great. I don't want. I don't like emotional complications. I like to operate cleanly. We put on our website, as soon as you land on our website, log in to manage your account and subscription. It's right there because I don't want people saying, you're trying to hustle me. I can't get to my account, like all this stuff. Like, no, it's right there. It's the first thing you see. So the if Brain Supreme doesn't work for you, it's you. It's not us because the proof's been in the pudding. And so, but because of that, I know how to kind of really problem solve. So just like to establish some criteria on Brain Supreme, like we've sold about 30,000 of these things now. We have on Shopify, we are in the absolute highest category for returned customers. 70% of people who buy Brain Supreme once buy it, go on subscription for at least 9 months. This is the highest in the entire supplement category on all of Shopify's 4 million websites. We've got almost 1,000 reviews. We're at like 4.8 stars. Like these things really work. Now, the level to which they're going to work and how they're going to work, that might vary. But if they don't work, it's because of something in your own neurology and your own biology. And I've learned some tricks to correct for that, which is kind of what we'll go through now. So the important things to consider when you're microdosing is, are you currently or have you been on an SSRI or SNRI antibiotic? If you have, the receptors in your brain called psilocin receptors could be blocked or clogged, and microdosing might not be as effective for you. Are you on an opiate painkiller? And are you on a prescription sleep medication? Because if you're on a prescription sleep medication, you need to time out your microdose and your sleep medication far apart because they're giving your brain cross signals, and it's not pleasant. Now, there are no known counterindications to a psilocybin microdose. Like literally, you know, there's there's no harsh consequence. The most common side effects, and I'm talking maybe 5 people out of 1,000. Some people get a headache on their first couple of days of microdosing, and some people get sleepy. And all that's corrected in the same way. Your brain uses more water and more calories than any other part of your body. So if you get sleepy during your first few days of microdosing, or you get a minor headache, it's almost 100% an indication that you are dehydrated. If you increase your water intake, good water, try to get the fluoride and chlorine out, try to drink, spring water or some good filtration system on your house. Okay. Add some electrolytes to your water once or twice a day. A good sports electrolyte, not Gatorade, no bullshit like that. LMNT, Zeal Naturals, Redmond Real Salt, the Utah-based company, they make a product called Relight, Relyte. Those are fantastic electrolytes. You want quality salt in your life, a little bit of Redmond Real Salt in the morning, a glass of lemon water, a pinch of salt under your tongue, drink that down. You need to be hydrated. And then you're going to want to add a magnesium supplement to your program. Qualia makes a multi-magnesium blend. So does Magnesium BioOptimizer's Magnesium Breakthrough. These are terrific products. They're going to give you 7 to 10 different forms of magnesium. And basically, your brain operates on minerals and it operates on good water and quality salt. So if you increase your minerals, you increase your salt, you increase your hydration, and you add some magnesium, it rectifies for almost all microdosing counterindications. The sleepiness will go away, the headache will go away. The other thing with microdosing is that sometimes, actually not sometimes, it is a biological indicator. So if you start microdosing and something starts to feel weird in your body, it's telling you 6 months, 18 months, 2 years in advance, you've got to pay attention to that part of your body, that organ, that's something that's going on. It's amazing. Like without fail, hundreds of times I've had this happen. Now I'm batting about 1,000% with that little correction formula. More water, okay, electrolytes, salt, and magnesium. It corrects for almost any issue with microdosing outside of the people who are on the antidepressants and so forth. If you are on an SSRI or SNRI antidepressant, microdose, nothing's going to go wrong with your microdosing. There's a strong likelihood that you might not feel the honeymoon-like benefits of it. But if you, and we've had this also dozens of times, if you responsibly, and I urge you to have the care of a good naturopath or homeopath, somebody, nutritionist, can kind of coach you. If you slowly start to scale down on your antidepressant and you stay with microdosing, we've had great success with people telling us that they've scaled off their antidepressants, stayed with their microdosing, and they're doing great. They're doing better than ever. Their brain health, their emotional health is kind of better than ever. So you can correct for these things. Outside of people who are on the antidepressants, the opiates, and the sleep medications, there's about 1 in 1,000 people who are naturally psilocybin resistant, that they just don't respond to psilocybin at the microdosing level. Now, there's something interesting that happens. So for most of us, we have these receptors, these psilocin receptors, and you give it 100 or 200 milligrams and it's enough to grab onto, and it can do some magic. It can do some work in there. There are some people that with 200 or 300 milligrams, it just agitates the receptors. That is not enough for this to kind of pull in and pull the psilocin in, and it's not quite so little that they can just ignore it. So it's this agitated little state. This exists in a small percentage of people. You have to then adjust your microdose to just below the agitated state or just above it. And then you can really start to microdose. So there's some journey, there's some exploration that has to happen. But I mean, look, 95% of people, you take 2 capsules of Brain Supreme, you're going to notice it and it's going to start to work for you. I'm talking about that 5% outlier. Now, there's a real interesting category. And not that I want to I'm not like a toot my own horn kind of guy, but I listen to a lot of podcasts and microdosing and mushroom coaches. I've never heard anybody correct for this. I've had 100 people over the last, 4 years, particularly 3 years since we've been active as a brand, and I get all these emails and feedback. They're like, the product doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'm like, okay, work with me here. I call them up. I'm like, take 3 days off. When you come back, I want you to take 4 Genius capsules. Let's see what happens at 400 milligrams. Nothing. I didn't feel anything, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I don't think this product's working. I'm like, okay, look, we make batches of 500. If this batch wasn't working, I would have 500 complaints because 4 of those 500 people are subscribers that get the product every 30 days. Believe me, they're going to let me know. So the product's working. I said, here's what you need to do. In some people, those receptors, even if you're not on antidepressant or anything, those receptors, fluoride, chlorine, chemical, pesticide exposure, those psilocin receptors can go dormant. And you need to take a beyond microdose, a recreational dose, 1 gram, 1.5 grams, maybe 2 grams, to turn those receptors on, to give those receptors enough to latch onto something. And then you can go back to microdose. And this has been really interesting to see that I've had dozens of people who somehow, maybe me, maybe somebody else, gets them a piece of chocolate or something where they're in the 1.5 gram range, and those receptors get turned on, and then they can go back and microdose. So it's really like it's been a very interesting process. Developing brand. It's interesting because kind of naturally being a contrarian, because and especially when you begin, the mushrooms are going to give you what you need before what you want. And sometimes the thing that you need, it's a little bit unpleasant. It's pointing to this organ or that organ, or it's pointing to dehydration, or, it's pointing to some adjustment in your attitude, or it's pointing to a trauma that needs to be released. There are some people, their first week of microdosing, they get very, very sad. And I'm like, stay with it. Okay. It's this neurogenesis process. You're unwiring some traumas in your past, and it's got to get moved through your body. It's got to get released. Just hang in there, stay with it, meditate, do some journaling, lean into what's going on, explore it, meditate on it, thinkitate on it, from different angles, let it get out of your system. So if people do that, there's a certain sentient quality to mushrooms. My feeling personally is that mushrooms are sentient and they love you. I find that mushrooms work on what I call the vertical axis. With psychedelics, there's two axes. There's the vertical axis and there's the horizontal axes. Okay, the vertical axis with mushrooms primarily is the earth. The mushroom grows in the earth. The Akashic records, the history of the earth. It's encapsulated in this fungus, and then you ingest it, and it opens you to the divine. So the purpose of the mushroom is to basically facilitate your opening from the earth through you to the divine, so that more divine energy can move and flow through you to this earth, to make you more fundamentally a healthier, happier, more productive human being on this earth where the mushrooms exist. Other psychedelics, LSD, DMT, very beneficial, but there's a horizontal plane that I don't find is as prevalent in the mushroom space. Some interesting, funky things can go on in the mushroom space, that's for sure. But this kind of horizontal space where things can feel maybe a little bad, maybe negative frequencies, other things trying to jump in and access you. It's a slightly more dangerous field to be playing in the horizontal psychedelic space. Then the mushroom space is a great kind of segue to begin it, because the mushrooms love you, and it's this vertical access. Even if people have a bad experience with mushrooms, 6 months later, they look back on it like ultimately it was beneficial. You know, it was beneficial. So it was a very, very kind of long answer to your original question about how to correct, how to approach it. But the other thing with microdosing is that it's not a very big deal. Essentially, microdosing is a vitamin, a supplement that you should notice. If you paid $90 for your vitamin C, it'd be really nice to go wow, I took that vitamin C and it was great vitamin C. It was worth $90. Okay, I get it. And that's really what microdosing is. It's a supplement that you should notice, that kind of continually kind of just keeps the wind in your sails and moving you to the best version of yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that because, and I'm sure you know this, a lot of the supplements out there, you don't notice anything because they're
Mhm.
not really doing anything. Or if they are, it's so subtle.
Yeah, it's that my thing
Like,
is, not to interrupt, it's I think they work. I hope they work. Everybody else got sick. I didn't get sick. For my age, I think I'm looking pretty good, but it's not you
right.
know, suddenly your multivitamin was boom.
So there's a couple big things I want to talk on there. You mentioned the horizontal plane, which is super interesting, because I dabbled with all of these things over the years. And for example, with DMT or 5-MeO DMT, for example, your experience with that is 1,000%, in my opinion, determined by who is administering the medicine. I have had both extremes, right? In Acapulco, we work with Bearheart, and also with Piazza, that's the best it gets. They're clean, they're good people, they're hands off, and then I've worked with the worst, and a lot of darkness came through, and I had to unpack that for many years, right? And then another big thing you mentioned, because I was taking notes while you were talking, is what you need. You get what you need before you get what you want. And it was reminding me of my very first experience microdosing. Well, actually, my very first experience microdosing, I had gotten mushrooms from a random guy in Mexico that were preserved in honey, full of botulism. I microdosed botulism until I ended up in the hospital. And so, like, I was afraid of it for years, right? And then I had been given some microdoses around the time of Acapulco from somebody I really trust. And I took one, I think it was like zero point 0.2 of a dosage of golden teachers or something, and 3 hours later, I'm crying to Bearheart on the beach, telling him my life story and dawning on me that I was making decisions about my life based on avoiding conflict with my ex at the time because I couldn't make decisions without him. And then I was like, man, is that how I really want to live? And there was a lot of sadness and there was a lot of anger that was coming through. And I mentioned, we broke up. We lived together. I ejected him from my house and my life. That sounds like a terrible process, right? But within the first month of starting mushrooms, I went through all that discomfort that I was ignoring for years. And within 30 days, I was in my own space. I was calm. I was relieved. It was really that process before I got to the, oh, now I can solve problems better thing. So I think for a lot of people, that's what that can look like. They might be looking around at things in their life like, wow, I hate what I do for work. And now I can't ignore it anymore because I'm microdosing. So how do I move through this to something better? And I think that right there in a lot of ways is the magic to it. I think there's really something to that. Which is like how fascinating, right? And then the other thing I wrote down is because you were talking about, well, okay, well, what if this doesn't work for people? The first time I tried to take mushrooms repeatedly and I tried taking macro doses, I felt nothing the first 3 times. People around me felt everything. Something was calcified up there, right? But in a recent conversation I had on this podcast with Piazza, who's a friend of mine, she does 5-MeO DMT experiences and other things of that nature. She tells people, like, when people are like, "Thank you, you changed my life," and she's like, "Well, I just gave you something that made you want to act more." And I think it's the same with mushrooms, like, if you microdose and then you don't act on any of the things that are coming up with it, whether I need to start training, like I need to start weightlifting, or I need to change my diet so I can feel good, or I need to change how I do my job. If you don't actually take that action, it doesn't matter what you do, it's not going to work. And I think there is probably a small percentage of people who are just not willing to take those actions, especially if it means I'm going to leave my partner, like I'm going to tell my boss to fuck off, right? And so I find that super fascinating. I find that super, super fascinating. I have a few more questions on here, and one of them is if you could have the entire world understand one thing about microdosing, what would it be?
Not to expect a magic silver bullet, to realize that you've got to do the work, that it's, look, if I, you know, I mean, like, I want to be prosperous. I want to help people. I want to make a nice life for my families and my partners and my colleagues and everything. But like, it's, but most important is that I exist authentically. And if I've got to rate like quality sleep, loving relationships in your lives, quality nutrition, supplementation, exercise, microdosing. You know, I'd probably put all of them ahead of microdosing that to keep some perspective on it, that this is a very good part of an overall healthy lifestyle. Now, the one thing that's interesting about microdosing is it's the habit that can create like it can create the energy that precedes the action a little bit. This is the amazing thing about the wiring of the brain. But just to moderate your expectations, to realize you've got to do the work, to don't think you can, stay up all night with video games and bad habits that you have and eating lousy. And then why isn't the microdose working? I don't know, because like nothing in your life is really working. Like you got to do some work for things to work. So just to keep that sense of perspective about it, that it's a very effective tool for self-optimization and self-realization, but it's part of an overall package. Um, and that if you approach it with like with a healthy attitude and a sense of perspective and a willingness to do the work, it really can be quite amazing. But you got to keep some perspective around and realize that it's health and wellness and emotional well being and spiritual connection. It it's a multifaceted process.
Yeah. And that goes back to what I was saying, like, none of this stuff is gonna work if you don't put into action actually having healthier habits, and
Yeah.
I agree with that, and I respect that. Cause yeah, I mean, if we lived in a perfect world where we weren't being bombarded by all different frequencies and poisons and all this stuff, we probably wouldn't need these things to start with, like, we would just be doing the thing and be completely fine. But I mean, how lucky for us that the universe, God, whatever you wanna call it, has sent us something that is there to kick us in the ass when we need it the most. So that is a beautiful thing. Another question I have here is, what is the most surprising thing that you have learned since being in this business about either, the nerdy mushroom fact or thing about people or thing about business, whatever it may be? What is the most surprising thing to you?
Basically, how ancient wisdom and um, your own intuition precedes all the scientific data. Because there's scientific data coming out about mushrooms and telomere length increasing and mushrooms and reverse aging and mushrooms and this 83-year-old woman from Spain who was advanced Alzheimer's, reversing her Alzheimer's. Like I could have told you that 5 years ago, like what I'm saying. And the shamans and the teachers who've been doing this for years and years and centuries, it was all there before, So it's kind of interesting how, that the intuition and the opening of your intuition that happens through macrodosing and microdosing seems to very much precede where 6 months, a year, 18 months, 3 years, 3 years later, suddenly it's just scientifically supporting something like that.
Yeah, like I think it was a couple years ago, sometime in the last 5 years, a study came out that proved it like measured people that took macro doses and then measured people that took micro the same amount of material in a microdose over an extended period of time. And it measured all sorts of things. But basically, the idea was you're going to get more out of the same weight, 5 grams, for example, if you spread it out over a long period than you are when you blast yourself. There's value to that macrodose, right? But like when you just fucking blast yourself, your body's trying so hard to process what's happening that a lot of the beneficial qualities is lost. So when you say you knew these things 5 years before, was that a study that surprised you?
Um, so I have this interesting thing on the macrodose in relationship to the microdose. So I find that what the macrodose does is you you enter into a very, very dark hotel room, blackout curtains. It's 2 a.m. You've been traveling all night. You can't, you open the room, the light doesn't go on automatically. You can't see anything. You don't want to wake yourself up too much. So you flick the light on for a second and then boom, the whole pattern of the room appears to itself. And that's all it takes. It's a spontaneous moment of illumination. And now when you got to wake up to take a piss, avoid this, don't knock your shins into that, walk this way, and you'll make it. That's essentially what the macrodose does, is the macrodose provides a spontaneous luminosity into your psychology, your personal history, your cosmos, the earth, nature, you're going to get some spontaneous illumination. The lights are going to come on. What the macrodose does when you do them together in conjunction with an occasional therapeutic dose is it continually walks you towards, but I'm sorry, after you finish the macrodose, the lights go back off. So the room is dark, but the pattern of the furniture is there. You kind of understand the lay of the cosmos, the lay of your psychology in new ways. You understand the patterning of the room, even though it's dark. The microdose keeps walking you towards the light. So they're very effective when done, in conjunction with one another. Um, but, I think in some ways, it's tough to say if you had to choose one versus the other, maybe ultimately, like some of these studies say, and, these studies are so weird because most of them have to use synthetic psilocybin
Mm,
because the FDA only approves a synthetic psilocybin. So it's not the whole mushroom. It's not the whole mushroom that was like grown lovingly or wild foraged, with a sense of care and then dehydrated and then ground. It's a whole different thing. So, and then you have the observer effect that influences so much, what is it? The protons, when observed, appear in a straight line, but when they're not observed, they're waving. So
right,
I'm so
right.
skeptical about science, about all these things, and about a lot of these tests because they're using synthetic psilocybin, which loses the entourage effect of all the other alkaloids and chemicals that are in that whole mushroom when you eat it. So, you know, I it's for me, it's so much about like personal experience. Start slow, trust your intuition. You know, the whole thing about good people. Set and setting and who's providing. It really matters. I have for your audience. I don't do trip sitting. I don't do macro coaching. I'm so busy with, like I tell every, two super athlete boys and 10 chickens, two dogs, a wife. Two, three businesses that I'm kind of developing and so forth. I don't get that much. I rarely have 6 to 8 hours to myself to do kind of the macro experience. I'm Mr. Microdosing. But the thing with the macro experience that I would want to say is that I have this thing that bends versus breaks. So if you're a fundamentally successful adult making your way in the world and you've got some bends, we've all taken some hits, some hits. Um, and then there's breaks, like the level of violence that you witnessed and experienced, so forth. Like those can be major psychological breaks. If you've got some bends along the way, you can do a journey yourself. You want to test it at like 1 gram, 1.5 grams, so you know what you're getting into. Choose a playlist, choose a day, choose the setting, be responsible, mindful for all that. But you can do a journey on your own or with, somebody kind of sitting with you. But if you've got some breaks, you really, really want to be mindful and careful. It's always best to be in an intelligent, loving, supportive, environment when you're doing these things. But if you've got some major trauma that you're working on, you probably really should be in the presence of a practitioner or a retreat center that's experienced in that. Like those things matter a lot. And the energy that you're going to get from that environment, matters a great deal. And you want to be very mindful of that environment. Particularly the more trauma you have, the more mindful you should be about your macro experience. It can be the best thing and probably will be one of the best things you've ever done for your psychological, emotional healing and well-being. But you don't want to create more trauma while you're trying to heal your
Right,
trauma. So
right.
approach that real mindfully and find a teacher, find a setting, find an environment that can support you, particularly if you're really dealing with some breaks.
Yeah, and I mean experience is everything, right? Like before I got those major breaks, I personally already had experience with psychedelic things to where, I was able to trust myself and take some journeys by myself and be okay, right? But I was also
Mostly,
very
I'm sorry to
aware.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm most talking about, like, early childhood trauma. Like, the
Yeah,
more early childhood trauma you have,
yeah.
the more you should be in a supported environment.
I agree with that, and it depends the type of trauma, there
Yeah.
there are certain things that you can deal with or, like I read a book. I read a lot of audible memoirs, or I listen to a lot of audible memoirs because I'm writing my own memoir, and so I'm trying to figure out how to structure my story, and I just finished one, and the whole premise of it was this woman had not only been being raped by her father, but she was being sexually trafficked by him as a child, like, as
Oh,
3-year-old child,
oh,
and that's the sort of stuff where you really need that extra care, whereas maybe some of the stuff that I dealt with is more than what most people deal with, but it's not that,
Yeah.
right? So there's really something to that. There's a time and a setting for it. In all my macro experiences I've had, I've always been like, okay, I'm not doing this for a while. I get why this is overwhelming, especially, mushrooms can be kind of dizzying and kind of intense physically, right? And if you're not used to that, you're going to be like, when is this going to end? And am I dying? In some cases. And pretty much all of them you're not, unless you accidentally microdose botulism. And for that, I just say do not buy mushrooms from shady Mexican shamans who give you a little baby food jar filled with honey, you know, and it didn't go well. But I'm glad it didn't deter me because with everything that I've been through, and it's a lot, I am, and my partner, he's so surprised by this. I am a very stable, very productive, very happy person despite all of that. And I think for me, the majority of it is various psychedelic experiences, either guided or not, within Mexico, where like a lot of this stuff is ceremoniously protected, right? Um, so I think that's it's a super interesting thing. One of the other questions I have is, first off, this one's a short one, but where do you ship? Like, do you ship to Mexico or do you only
So
ship? Go ahead.
we we use FedEx exclusively. We have a European distributor, and we have an Australian distributor. So we were able to bring our costs down to Europe and Australia and New Zealand significantly, which is great. We ship only using FedEx. We ship all through the United States and the world. There are certain countries that apply significant restrictions on supplements, and Mexico is one of the worst. So Mexico is one of the places that um, we will ship there if somebody wants, but we won't guarantee it because we've never had a single success. So when people write me from Mexico, I'm like, I wouldn't bother. It's most likely not gonna work. If you have, like, a mail center in the US that has, like, some secret little way to get stuff to Mexico, you can I have a client in El Salvador, he sends everything to Miami, the place in Miami makes sure that they have a way that it gets to him and so forth. So I have some clients like that, but honestly, Central and South America, they're very restrictive on supplements. Europe is great. We get everything all over Europe, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Dubai, Kuwait, we've shipped there a lot to Australia and New Zealand. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, Mexico it's not very successful. People from Mexico will come here, and I'll do a local sale, or when they're visiting the U.S., they'll buy a whole bunch of it, and then because you can bring in your suitcase to Mexico, it's just a supplement pack, and it's like doesn't say anything, chaga reishi, cordyceps, lion's mane, it's fine. But there's something about the, shipping, the customs, import customs on supplements are really restrictive.
Yeah, the thing with Mexico is Mexico places heavy tariffs on things that they feel they can produce in the country. And that could be everything from glassware to supplements to foodstuffs to technology, whatever it is. If there is any source of that within Mexico already producing that, it is very difficult to get it here without paying heavy import things. And there are like freight forwarders, right? There's like a company called Soltec, but it's prohibitively expensive, it'll cost
Well,
you $100
it's not
shipping.
even the expense. It's like, with FedEx, we have all our ingredients listed, we have all the customs filled out. Like, literally, Mexico doesn't let certain supplement ingredients in, a pretty prodigious list. They just don't allow supplements to be imported.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not surprising to me. It is I think the hardest part of living here is it is not easy to get certain things here, it's very, very difficult. Um, the next big question that I have for you is, what is next for Brain Supreme?
So, we just launched this product called Max Stack. This does not have psilocybin in it. This is basically everything that complements psilocybin: mushrooms, adaptogens, aminos, and cacao. So, in a base of ceremonial cacao and Ceylon cinnamon, we've got chaga reishi, lion's mane, cordyceps, all grown at our facility. Nine different amino acids, and then 9 different adaptogens and minerals and nutrients. So it's like one of these nuke your coffee or superfood your coffee formulas or replace your coffee. We left it unsweetened, so it is bitter. I let everybody know. But you add a little honey, a little milk, a little cream, and it brings out the cacao and the Ceylon cinnamon. It's a really powerful nutrient superfood that it's basically every ingredient that can complement a micro and a macro dose is what we were trying to create. So we've got that. We sell some really interesting Shilajit online with our European partner. These are these little Shilajit caviar, so you're not eating the terrible tar. They're these little caviars. They're terrific. But really, with Reign Supreme is, I don't want an overwhelming amount of products on our website. We're really going to level off at these 6 products. I just want more word of mouth, more expansion, more growth. Um, to reach more people and to help more people. We have our lane, and I don't want to be a supplement superfood store. I only want to sell the products that we grow and originate ourselves. This is the only one because it's the extraordinary Shilajit, and it's a bit of a quid pro quo. I sell his stuff here, he sells my stuff there. But it's a fantastic product and it goes great. But besides that, like I was swinging for the fences in the cannabis industry, big, big, big. And I'm like at my age and where I'm at, like, I really like the idea of hitting singles, like, let's have a really high on base average. Let's just keep hitting singles, steady growth, helping people. I love the idea, where my company's at right now. I can still have like a really nice life, make a nice living with my partners, and I can reply to every single customer myself. I don't need AI. I don't need to have, fake AI, the fake Adam AI, the coach and all that other bullshit. We've had people approach us with AI stuff. Like, we're the anti-AI company. All I want to do is talk to my customers myself. I don't want to pretend me, a meta me doing anything like that. So if we could just kind of, this place of steady growth, we grow by like 180 to 200% a year. I love that. Um, and we do meaningful work. We really care about our customers, and I love what I'm doing. It feels great. I have a youth nutrition line that we're starting, which is something very different, but that's kind of another business. And I have more partners on that who are very highly capable to handle the marketing and so forth. So I love what we're doing, Brain Supreme. I love the products we make. I love our customers. They all get it. Think about 30,000 sales, almost all of it word of mouth and through podcasts, and 15 or 20 people have written me, does this have the secret ingredient in it? Like, everybody gets it. Everybody tends to be cool. I get so few, like, they stick with you because, we're programmed to, negative feedback weighs 9 times more than positive feedback because, you know, negative feedback used to cause us to die. So we have to react more strongly to that. If a woolly mammoth wandered into your campsite, it only happened once. You know what I'm saying? You learned the protection. But I'm very happy. I'm very satisfied, and I love our growth trajectory and the people that are buying our products and just being adding value to the world and people's lives. It feels great.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really all about sustainability, right? Like, you can blast off to the moon, but can you sustain it? And I think what you managed to build is something very sustainable and at the same time really impactful. So I love that very much. I really hope we can have you at Anarchapulco next year.
Yeah, it's February, right?
February 9th is the opening party, 10th to the 14th is the main event. And it's in Puerto Vallarta again. And
Yeah, my kids are of an age now where and our business is at an age, at a point with marketing and expenses and things like that that we can justify. Where I think this is the year it's really going to happen.
I'm excited for that. And I know that Kat's excited for that because she's like, that, it changed her life, that Genius Blend. And I'm going to be trying to figure out a way to get it here because, like I said, I do have a good source of just the psilocybin, but it works with those other things, and there is something to having a proprietary strain because, like you had mentioned previously with they're taking synthetic psilocybin. Well, I'm sure you know this with weed. You can't just do a THC study and apply that to all cannabis because cannabis is, THCA and THCB and CBD and all of the different compounds. That's what makes it what it is. It's not just one little piece or morsel of it.
Yeah. Next time you have a friend visiting that's going to visit you from the States, they should just put an order in or contact me. I'll hook them up. I'll send some freebies and stuff like that to your friend. And then if they're, coming down your way, they just put it in the suitcase. There's no problem at all. That's always works out fine.
I have some ideas for that. So I'll
Yeah.
let you know. And of course, we will be in touch. Thank you for taking the time to do that.
Well,
And
let's do a discount for your listeners. We'll do a 15% discount. Do you do
okay.
like is your code usually an Acapulco? Like what's your code?
Yeah, usually for this sort of stuff is in Acapulco. I'll make a note
Okay, so
too.
does is how quickly does this air?
This is gonna go out not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday
Okay, so
after.
we got plenty of time. So you're gonna put an Acapulco in the website on the show notes, uppercase, lowercase, it doesn't matter, and we'll have a 15% discount for the an Acapulco lists on the
Amazing. Amazing. I think
how do
it's
you
gonna
pronounce what do you call your people? Anarchapulkians or
and okay, so in Acapulco, of course, is named like based off of Acapulco, right?
Right.
And Acapulco people in Mexico are called Acapulqueños, so they're Anarchapulqueños.
There we go.
I know that's a mouthful, right? It's not easy for people that don't live in Mexico, but it works, right? Every little area has its like, Morelianos or various Guerenses or whatever. There's a little like nickname for it. So it's Anarchapulqueños.
Terrific. Great conversation. Thank you so much, Miranda.
Thank you for joining.
It's my pleasure.